Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios, as ever, from the beaches of the last free state in America, Florida. I am honored to be joined today, cross country, by Samantha Ettus, who has been an activist currently for Jewish causes after October 7th, but prior to that has been a very accomplished leader, brander, and author. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So dive right in. I was delighted. Well, delighted is the wrong adjective to use, but after the horrific events of October 7th, and there are often times, I don't know about you, when I wish to high heaven that I would be wrong. On October 9th and 10th, I gave 2 interviews in which I said, I give it a week before the entire media starts whining about the kids in Gaza, and they don't care about the Jews that were killed on October 7th. And we have now watched that flourish into an outbreak of Jew hatred around the world that makes 1939 look tame. So I know you've gotten heavily involved. Could you tell us a bit about what you've been doing and how you got here and all that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, your prediction of a week was probably too long, right? It was probably 24 hours. But yeah, so on October 7th, my son was bar mitzvahed, ironically. And I luckily it wasn't October 8th, because on October 7th, we really didn't understand the gravity of what had happened. So it didn't impact us at the celebration. But the next day, it was clear that things had taken a terrible turn, and the horrors of October 7th started unfolding for all of us. And I then basically unwittingly became an activist for Jews. And I frankly was not in the right position to be that person, meaning I didn't feel qualified. So what ended up happening is I was always very active on social media. I'm very active, especially on Instagram. And on Instagram, I have a nice following, a nice size following. So as soon as the horrors happened, I thought, okay, everything I'd been posting about before, which was really about careers and women and work-life balance issues, it seemed absurd to suddenly post on October 8th or 9th about having a 25th hour in your day, or my latest cute outfit, or my work hack, So I suddenly started posting about October 7th. And it became clear to me that people were expecting more from me. So the next day they'd say, okay, what's happening now? Right. And I looked around and I kept looking behind me thinking someone else is going to come, right? Like there's going to be other people who are here talking about this who are far more qualified than I am. And beyond Noah Tishby, there wasn't really anyone. So I realized that I needed to educate myself completely. And I started giving myself, and I joke, I've been giving myself a master's in Middle East history, just started cramming books. I'm constantly reading about Israel.
It's very simple. It's not complicated at all. So that's great.
It's true. And it's true. It's once you understand the history, you realize it isn't complicated, and there is no context, and it is very clear. But I think that what prevents so many people from speaking out is the fear of not knowing enough and thinking it's complicated. And I'm trying to make people realize that it's not that complicated. I have educated myself in 4 months, and you can too.
Thank you. That is a very interesting perspective. And I appreciate that, because you said that twice, that you didn't feel qualified to say something. And that's really interestingly put. Because I have studied in the region and studied Arabic and Islamic history, and I've worked in the region. So I've got a keen sense of how awful these death cultists are, primarily to their own people, before we even get to them hating Jews, which is their main sport. But that's interesting. Is it your impression that a lot of people share that sentiment, that this seems like a complicated topic, and therefore they're kind of loath to wade in?
Well, I think, first of all, no one really understands jihadism. I mean, besides Sam Harris, who's been talking about it for years, right? Most of us have not been thinking about jihadism. And it seems like something that happens in other countries or to other people. And you don't realize how much it's infiltrated our country. I mean, maybe you did, Christopher, because you were so on top of these issues from a long time ago. But for most of us, we were not focused on jihadism. We were not focused on what was going on in the Middle East or Israel, being threatened. It just seemed like the course of everyday life. And as Jewish Americans, we certainly felt very shielded from anti-Semitism in a huge way. And we might have thought about it sometimes, but it wasn't part of our everyday, fabric of our life. It was just something that occasionally we thought about.
Sure.
And for me, it was like when I would host Jewish holidays at my home, I would pause before sometime posting about my noodle kugel or something like that, because I thought, oh, well, probably have a lot of non-Jewish followers, but then I would just still post, but I still wasn't that comfortable. In fact, one week after October 7th, I took my daughter to an LA Rams game. She's 18 and she was wearing her Jewish star. And I told her to take it off and she
Ooh,
refused.
good for her.
And we got in an argument about it. I was like, this isn't safe, etc. Now here I am, I'm like loud and proud. She was right, I was wrong, and I've since
Okay.
apologized to her. But it really, when I realized how wrong it was, is when we went to friends' home and they said they had just taken down their mezuzah because they were scared that when they get like Uber deliveries, whatever, and or Postmates, and I thought, okay, something has gone terribly wrong, and we all have to be loud and proud, and there's safety in numbers. And so back to October, I just started, with this intense education about the region. Then all these other things happened, the anti-Semitism on campus. I went to Harvard, so I became super involved in what is going on at my alma mater. Why am I suddenly embarrassed by a brand? How could a brand be tarnished that
So
fast?
badly. One of my new goals in life is to get the Harvard legal department to sue me for defamation. That's one of my goals, because I
Okay, well, I
want
hope you
that to
win.
happen. Oh, I'll win. I want that to happen. I criticize them viciously and include them on all my Substack notes. I long for it. Bring it, guys. Sorry, go
Yeah, I mean,
ahead.
it really is heartbreaking. It's funny because I was such an active alum. I'm the kind of person that goes to every reunion, and now I am just so traumatized by what's happened there. And I think that the important thing is the safety of our students.
Yep.
And if you're a college, you have to protect your students, period. And what's going on, I think when I look at what's happening on college campuses, I think that when I see these protests in a library or in a building,
Crazy.
that's when I go bananas,
Yeah.
because why
Craziness.
in the world, even MoMA a couple of weeks ago,
Yes.
right? I mean, why are we allowing people to take over our institutions from the inside out? I just don't understand, and I have no empathy for it. It's not free speech, it's terrorism.
Yes, it has been a plan. Deliberately, I was actually talking to a good friend yesterday. He grew up in Winnetka, Chicago suburbs, with Bill
Sure.
Ayers, Weather Underground. Right. He then went on with his awful wife Elizabeth Dorn to propagandize. They call it teaching at Northwestern for years. And their awful son Chesa Boudin became the district attorney of San Francisco. They've been at this deliberately since the 60s. And that's what I've found fascinating, is that people on the far right, they sound insane, right? So you got to be careful, right? Because they instantly verge into, and Hillary Clinton runs a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor. You're like, whoa, 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 stop, stop, stop. No, that's nuts. But Ayers told them directly that they modeled, leftists in the 60s modeled their attempts at Marxist activism on the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, and the Catholic Church. If you want to change society, you change education, you change the next generation. They've been at it now for 3 generations, and every draft dodger from the Vietnam War who did not become a man, just anthropologically speaking, and dodged the draft and went and stayed in school because daddy could pay for it, they infested our educational institutions for all these decades. And a lot of a sheer part of Marxism, which comes directly from Karl, who was the original self-hating Jew after Spinoza, is that everything about Judaism, and George Gilder writes about this beautifully in the Jewish Test, that people wonder why this fierce hatred of Israel, fierce hatred of Judaism, because Israel represents the apotheosis of the Ten Commandments, which was the origin of individual rights and responsibilities. If you listen to the left, it's all about group identity. There's no individual, it's all group identity. And if you are a loser and your life sucks, and the Jewish kid you went to high school is the CEO of Paramount Pictures or a mining company or something, and you're just a loser that hasn't worked hard, you're not going to tell yourself you're a loser that hasn't worked hard. You're going to find someone to blame. And our
Well, so
culture sadly provides a ready-made trope of who is to blame. And that infection has got to be burned out of our educational institutions like a hot iron on a tick. that we are just starting. The war is the start, but like
Well,
all
yeah,
these people
and
gotta
actually,
go.
the way and in terms of getting people involved and engaged, right? Because if you look at the Holocaust, there were 300 million people who lived in Europe during the Holocaust, and only 30,000 spoke up.
Yep.
So my personal mission is to get more people to speak up and to do it comfortably. Now, the way I've been trying to explain to people that they can get involved is that it becomes very overwhelming. If you are not as educated as Christopher Messina or newly educated as Samantha Ettus, how do you suddenly engage in this conversation or insert yourself into the conversation? And so one of the ways I think about it is we have 4 different wars we're fighting right now. We're fighting the war on propaganda.
Yep.
We're fighting the war against Hamas and now 3 other fronts.
All of them, Hezbollah, Fatah, they're all the same.
Exactly. There's so
They're all the
many,
same.
right? So you can call that the war. We're fighting the war against anti-Semitism and, in the diaspora, and we're also fighting for the hostages release. And so those are 4 different wars. So you pick. So what I say to people is you pick which one you're going to get involved in, because it's impossible for a normal person who's not devoting their career to this to get involved in all 4. So
Right.
pick whatever your lane is and focus there. And along with that, I was just alarmed by the silence in Hollywood and alarmed by the silence of so many influencers who were just posting about everything but this.
Mm-hmm.
And it disgusted me. And I felt like it was like we were holding the backs of all of these people. Like, why is everyone riding our coattails of the few people who are speaking about it? And we needed more voices. And so along those lines, about a month ago now, I launched, or 3.5 weeks ago, I launched a campaign to make it safe, or like a safe space for Hollywood people and celebrities and influencers to speak out against anti-Semitism. And in doing so, I had to be very careful of not making it about Israel, not making about anything geopolitical. It's literally just, I am saying these words. I am Christopher Messina and I am against anti-Semitism. It's that simple. And if you want to add a personal story, great. If not, we just want you to say those words.
Right.
And I mean, the experience of getting people to be comfortable saying that was an education in itself.
Which is, I'm fascinated, because I'd love to hear kind of what some of the back and forth of some of those conversations was like, because I loved when Sacha Baron Cohen did that hilarious movie where he pretended to be an Austrian journalist and came to LA and tried to interview real people. I still love the fact that people don't recognize him. He's a genius, right? But when he was pointing to the pictures of people on the wall he wanted to interview, and he pointed to Mel Gibson and said, "Well, we couldn't get the Führer." Priceless.
Yes.
Absolutely priceless. And I am really fascinated because in the context of the American Jewish community, right? I come from New York. And
Me too.
And what I found fascinating is that I am perfectly happy in an ultra-Orthodox synagogue or a Reform. I don't care. I mean, to me, it just doesn't matter at all. And right now, it really shouldn't matter to anybody. And the divisions I'm hearing, like, there are a few people in this world that I would say that if I had a chance, I'd punch them square in the face, even if surrounded by security. Noam Chomsky comes to mind. Like, the number of prominent intellectual self-hating Jews is a bafflement to me.
I used to love Noam Chomsky. It's very sad. Very sad.
Awful man. I've hated him forever. I just can't stand the man. I think his linguistic work is facile. But anyway, just the Hitler didn't ask what kind of Jew you were when he shoved you in the ovens. Like, I don't understand anybody. These idiots. It's almost like the people dumb enough marching the queers for Hamas. Why not be a cow for an abattoir? Like, what are you talking about? But sorry, I'm straying.
Yeah.
What was the reaction you got when some people were like, well, I mean, these are the same people that instantly jumped in the bandwagon and started screaming about George Floyd, a 6-time convict loser stoned resisting arrest, and suddenly he was a saint. How are those same people not happy to stand up and say,
we don't have to debate the George Floyd thing, but I will say I was one of the people that was speaking up for George Floyd, because I don't think that kind of violence is acceptable for that kind of the punishment did not fit the crime. Okay. So we can agree with that.
I'm just talking about the advocacy on behalf.
Right. So I think the advocacy was about, okay, we have a problem in America with how we do racial profiling and all of that stuff, right?
Fair enough.
Now I do think that all of us, like there's a lot of us Jews who speak up for any oppressed group because we identify with them.
Sure.
And I used to do a ton of public speaking in the DEI world. And now I feel like I was part of the problem because it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be included in DEI. I mean,
Oh
it would
no.
never have occurred to me that we were the oppressors, right? That Jewish people were considered white when it's helpful to certain people, and then we're considered not white when it's helpful to them. And it's like we have the worst of both worlds. And I think that it's really important that we distinguish, like, it doesn't mean that it's bad to have diversity. It's actually, it helps the bottom line. There's so many things diversity helps, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But at the same time, you have to protect the Jewish people are 15 million people. We are an extreme minority that needs protection. And you have to include us in that, or you can't exist at all. And so I've become an extremist in that area in terms of thinking of us as a diverse group. Now, this oppressed rhetoric has been going on, as you said, in academia for so long, and we just weren't paying attention, most of us. And I think it's alarming. Now, in terms of Hollywood and speaking out and getting people to speak out, I'm sure you feel this way too. I have friends who will say, like, I'm totally, proud of being Jewish. I don't really know that Israel needs to exist. And you're like, do you even, I mean, these are educated Jewish people, and it's made me so angry. And I can't help but think, like, this is our moment. It's like saying, okay, I'm totally in favor of Pakistanis, but I don't believe Pakistan should exist. Like,
they don't really need that. They can live other places.
It doesn't make any sense. And you would never get away with saying that. And just because we cannot get away with saying that you do not support Israel. It is your homeland, period. But that said, for this campaign, I needed Jewish people to see their favorite celebrities speaking out so that they felt less alone. But I really also needed the followings of these influencers and celebrities to say, oh my gosh, my favorite influencer, my favorite celebrity is against anti-Semitism. I should be too. And to have that influence. And so because of that, we kept the message super simple. We've had everyone from Cindy Crawford to Connie Britton to, Vernon Davis, the ex-NFL player, Zach Randolph, the NBA player. Like, we have athletes, everyone you can imagine. And every day we add a few new voices, at 2024 new voices. But for all the people that have spoken up, there's also a lot who have not. And there's a lot who say no. And they say that they just don't get political. And I say, well, it's not political to stand against you. I mean, listen, if someone said to you, will you speak out against Asian hate? And you said, I need to ask my manager, it would be ridiculous, right?
So which Asians?
Right, exactly.
Cambodians? Forget it.
That's exactly right. Which Asians? I mean, it's so absurd. It's if you replaced Jews with any other ethnic group and said, can you speak out against hating this group? No one would say, let me call my agent and see if it's okay, or let me call my publicist. But in Hollywood, everyone is saying, let me ask my publicist if it's okay. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, whenever it goes through a publicist or an agent or a manager, they say no.
Of course.
So we have to go directly to the celebrity or directly to the influencer. I had,
as Sarah Silverman once said in one of her stand-ups, where someone in a newspaper was busy criticizing something Jewish. She's like, I'm sorry, I thought we controlled that.
Right, exactly.
Like, how did that slip through? What's going on? It was priceless.
Well, I mean, and that's another heartbreak, is the media, right? I mean, this is the New York Times is despicable in how they've even contributed. I mean, you're supposed to be unbiased when you are a media source, especially the paper of record.
That hasn't happened since, I don't know, Gallipoli. There's been no lack of bias in 60 years.
What they did with misrepresenting what happened with the hospital
Crazy.
They actually contributed so much to this war. They were a player in the war.
Yes,
and
still are.
I'm still stunned that we do not hold their leadership accountable in any way.
But do you know what we on Wall Street have called the New York Times for 50 years? We call them Pravda. The old Russian newspaper means truth, the Communist Party organ. I mean, I used to have a game with friends where once a year, because I don't read it, it's nonsense, pure Marxist propaganda. And I would I'd challenge them, give me any section of the New York Times, and we'll see how many sentences I can get through before I start screaming. And the most I ever got through was, I think, 5 paragraphs. And that was because it was the fashion section talking about the costume exhibit at the Met. And then somewhere, 5 paragraphs down, they had to make some comment about evil capitalism. Like, there, I found it. They're awful. I don't believe that, my parents still read it, and I ask them why. They have no answer.
Well, it's part of our history, right? Like we've always, especially if you grew up in New York, you think of it as the paper of record. You have all this respect. Same with the Washington Post. I have so much respect for the Washington Post and CNN. Like these are our media institutions. And now that we're seeing how much is on the line and how much damage they're doing, it's really, it's scary. So I think that all of our allegiances are changing and shifting, and especially our relationships post October 7th.
No, it's true. I love what you're doing, because they've driven me insane for years, because just because I've just watched their bias, right? All of them. And a good friend of mine and I, we both finished high school together. I went to the University of Chicago, he went up to Harvard. And it was funny comparing notes as we went through those 4 years as to what that was like. And he ended up coming to Chicago for grad school. So that was even funnier. But what we started proactively here is because media is your world, right? That's what you get, right? And that's the right. Everyone should speak to their strengths. What we've been doing very quietly. I've written about it. I've spoken about it a bit, but instantly I said, this is unacceptable. There will be full accountability. Bill Ackman said it a week after I did, so lucky him. He got more press, but we have already started building. I come out of the tech world and the finance world. We pulled together about 20 people so far. We're adding more, and we're building what has been called the list, or project accountability. I don't want the government to ever maintain a list, right? That makes me nervous. Private sector, we're building basically a anti-Jewish credit check. So the idea being, if you go apply for a job, if the company that you're applying for is going to use this service, and I don't care if we'll have it up and running hopefully in about a year, but I don't care if it's 20 years from now. I want you to be 45 years old in 20 years, and the HR professional types you in, pulls up a picture of you marching with the River to the Sea sign on Harvard Yard in this year in 2023, 2024, and say, is that you? Get out of here. Go. You're not hired.
Are you familiar with Canary Mission?
Yeah.
Okay.
A few of them are doing it.
Yeah.
And they're pushing in the right direction. What we're doing is bringing together
the
big
tech
data,
part of it,
massive facial recognition, data capture, video capture. So there will be nowhere to hide. And I love calling them out one by one, because again, I refuse to be silent. And if you are going to march calling for the death of Jews, I will write about it and talk about it until my carpal tunnel, but I want practical impact, that you will be unemployable in this country, except for people that don't like Jews. Okay.
I mean, you'll be unemployable to the Jews. I don't know that
to any rational person, right?
Else. Well, we'd hope so. But, I think that's what is so scary, is when you see how many institutions have been infiltrated by this hate. And when you look at BDS and SJP, like this is my cousin's son, his class was just canceled the other day at Cornell because the professor said it was an International Day of walking out of class for Palestinians. And his class was canceled because of it. I just spoke at the USC Hillel last week, and the stories I heard there are super alarming. There was one girl who was writing about Jewish things, and she was kicked off of the Daily Trojan because they don't want someone writing about Jewish issues in the paper. There was a kid who was sharing his syllabus, and it had a picture of the Palestinian flag on the syllabus.
Yep.
It's just become untenable for students in so many.
DeSantis has called for any Jewish student in the country that feels uncomfortable, they are welcome at any Florida university.
Yeah, I saw
Why
that.
do with the Hillel here?
Ben Sass, who would have ever thought? I mean, Ben Sass has become an incredible leader in this. But I
Yep.
mean, it's very unfortunate for someone who cares about not just Jewish rights and cares about women's rights and things like
Right.
that. It's very unfortunate that a lot of the people who are against women's rights are suddenly now for Jewish rights, because it's confusing, and you wish some of the people could be for both. So it's a upside down world now.
It is. I mean, I've spoken with the campus security. My daughter's in college in Florida, and we're filtering which schools they can go to. Nothing in the Northeast makes the cut. Nothing. We got 2 more kids coming. Not a chance. Not a chance I would pay for. There's already a short list of schools I would not. I told them, if you want to go there, you got to get a loan. I'm not paying for Marxist propaganda. So again, I really wish, going back to October 6th, that what I thought of all these institutions would turn out to be wrong. And sadly, I was right. And that I'd rather be wrong and have a better world than have been right about how awful these people are. But now that, as I tell all new employees, there are 3 areas of human existence in which absolute acceptance of reality is critical before you make progress: Buddhism, finance, and alcoholism. If you don't accept reality, you're fixing the wrong problem. And this problem is metastasizing leftist Jew hatred, which dovetails beautifully with neo-Marxism on these campuses. And they've just been pushing and pushing and pushing. And those of us who've spoken up and pushed back have been largely ignored. Right?
So
when
I have a
you go
question
back
for
and look at the
you.
history of the McCarthy hearings, you look at the McCarthy hearings in a whole different light. You know what every country in Europe has that we don't have? A communist party. So a lot of people made a lot of money making Jim Carrey. Lots of people, especially in Hollywood, that got pummeled by Joe, right? Calling them out as communists, and all that's bad and all that. And a lot of movies are made, and a lot of careers are made. But when you stop back and look, there's no communist party in this country. And I want to have the similar impact that there will be no more institutionalized Jew hatred, the kind that pushed Louis Brandeis, to be a trailblazer at Harvard, and the kind that our kids are experiencing now. It's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. And I don't know, I think we're all doing our part to make that. And I love what you're doing. It's incredibly outspoken, and you're doing it on a platform that the kids see. None of these kids listen to me. I'm a boring old mining executive. So we're just trying to make sure that they're fired and not hired again.
Well, it is very difficult to reach young people with this message. So many of them, what I've been trying to get people to call it is radicalized. So if we can start the language of "you've been radicalized," oh, that's so sad, you've been radicalized. Just like if your child was the victim of drugs, you'd want to know, you should tell a parent when their child's been radicalized. They need to know. It's the same thing. And I think there's so much propaganda out there, and unfortunately they've been working on it for years, and they're so good at branding. So the idea, if you say to this lonely freshman, "Hey, do you want to join a march for freedom?" I'm all about freedom. Of course I want to free these people.
Your oppressor being mean to people.
I mean,
open air prison.
Free Palestine, that's easy. I want to free everyone. So, I mean, you can see how it happens. And I think that it's really scary. And our messaging is just never going to be the same. I think what's really been scary is seeing, so for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Glennon Doyle, who has an enormous platform as a podcaster and author. She has a huge following, and she just came out and raised all this money for the children in Gaza. And it's kind of like, how do you not realize that money is going straight to Hamas? But
we're already billionaires and already don't care about these children by definition.
It's just insane. And so when you think that someone like that can be radicalized, it almost feels hopeless. I approached a friend of mine in Hollywood the other day who I've known for years, and I asked her to make a video for our campaign, because it's so easy. You just make a video on your phone and we put our logo on it, and it's easy. And she wrote me, like a very long explanation of why she can't be part of it, because she doesn't understand the political situation. And it blows your mind. And you think, okay, should I spend my energy on this person, or should I move on from this person? And I think that's the math all of us are doing every day. It's like, should I engage with these people who are so misinformed and somehow giving an excuse for why they can't speak out against Jew hatred, or should I move on to the lovers instead of the haters? And I think that so much of our country is just silent and doesn't care.
No, they
And
don't care at all. It's irrelevant.
those are the people I want to wake up. And that's my biggest concern.
It's a good one. The only I've tried a couple of messages with younger people. I have access to a few that can't run away. That I said, well, here, let me posit this for you. You're in 5th grade, 6th grade. The school bully who outweighs the nerd on the schoolyard by 50 pounds walks up to him and demands his lunch money. Unbeknownst to the school bully, the nerd has been taking Taekwondo since he was 4, and he levels the bully, puts him down, takes his money back, leaves him with a bloody nose and a black eye, and the bully goes crying to the principal and demands his money back. That's what happened in 1947 and 1948. Instead of just settling down to build a productive society on what was basically a backwater of the Ottoman Empire and welcome the Jews home after all these years, they could be, the Gaza should be paradise.
Oh, sure. It's great land.
Should be paradise. Like they should be happily charging Jews and Europeans $40 for a mint julep with no alcohol on the beach, right? Happily. And what Samaria and Judea right now, quick question. What is the most expensive real estate per square foot in the world? Where is it?
Dubai. I don't know. You tell me.
Mecca. Think
Mecca.
about it. It's the holy city, and they ain't building more of it, and it's in a valley, and everyone likes the site. Singapore, Dubai, New York, San Francisco, and they compare them all. It is like 50 times more expensive per square foot. You could buy a studio apartment of 800 square feet in Mecca, would cost you $70 million. Like, because there's only this much of it, right?
Wow.
And the closer you can get to the Kaaba, the better it is. And so by those metrics, Bethlehem should be a thriving city. Like the tourism alone that should go through the West Bank and Gaza, and these people have chosen hatred, Jew hatred, and death over prosperity for their people. And so it is absolute madness, and they've infected multiple generations. And the fact that we've been supporting the UN through this, who participated on October 7th, and there's still people arguing.
What do you think we should do about the UN?
Everyone who was involved should be hanged, just the way Churchill said at the end of World War II. What are you going to do with the Nazis? He said, we're going to round up the 50 leaders, we're going to give them a fair trial, and we're going to hang them.
So just the UNRWA people, like that's it, and then the rest of it.
Every last one, and most of the UN, it's a pox. It is an outdated, anachronistic corruption feast. Having been in the oil markets, we watched when Kofi Annan's son made himself a billionaire trading with money that was destined to, like, all this crap. We're going to send human aid. We're going to allow the Iraqis to sell some oil because that's going to go to the people. It never goes to the people.
Right.
So the massive amounts of sleaze and corruption. Do you know what the UN building in Manhattan, what that was before it became the UN building?
What?
The Rockefellers owned it. It was an abattoir. I can think of nothing more fitting. It was a slaughterhouse on the river, and environmentalism plus estate taxes were coming. And one of their clever lawyers said, let's give it to an international entity because it's so polluted and so awful, and Manhattan doesn't need a slaughterhouse anymore. And that became the UN. That could not be a more fitting prelude to this horrible, horrible beast.
Well, so I was at the UN for the hearings about, that were in front of UN women, the hearings about the mass rapes on October 7th, and Sheryl Sandberg and Senator Gillibrand and Mandana Dayani and a few other people gave firsthand accounts of what they saw, and it was horrific, obviously.
Yep. But
they had to do that to get the attention of UN women who'd never spoken up for these women, right? And they spoke up for every other woman on the planet who's a victim, except for Jewish women. But one of the things that keeps plaguing me since then, so I stood in line, made sure I got my ticket and my seat, et cetera. And is at what point do we stop giving so much credibility to them, right? So when we have these hearings and we all show up for these hearings and we say, look, the UN gave us a forum, or we have class trips to the UN, it's like we're indoctrinating people in a corrupt institution that needs to be reformed. It needs to,
be abolished.
Well, it's funny because I just was talking to my 13-year-old son about that. And he said to me, abolishing the UN is kind of like saying defund the police. He's like, you still need the UN in some ways. You just need to change it and redo it.
I'd be fascinated. I'd also be fascinated to hear what he thinks. A bright young man. I have dealt with them over the course of the years in many horrible spots, including war zones in the world. I see no role for them whatsoever. None.
So you don't think there's any need for a similar institution in the world?
No, I think there's often anything that needs to come up now. I mean, it was created in the era of telegraphs and cables with instantaneous communication, the ability to create ad hoc forces. Right now, entire things happen in West Africa, Francophone Africa, where the French and others intervene. The UN's never involved. And so there are plenty of ways when there are regional disputes or there are military issues that we'd want to solve, which is, I think, was the residual need for these people at all. We can put that together with ad hoc coalitions of the willing in the region where it matters, and all the rest of the stuff can be turned over to other NGOs, can be turned over to city states. I mean, I know some of the folks who work at UNICEF, they do a wonderful job, but that doesn't need to be run by the UN out of Geneva.
See, I grew up from my mom telling me UNICEF was anti-Semitic, so you have other.
Probably it is. They all are.
Okay.
It is. The UN is. I mean, what, 95% of their
Well,
resolutions
clearly the
every
UN
year?
is, yes.
The Security Council and the Human Rights Councils get to have people like Cuba on it. Like, it's a joke. It's an absolute, it's an anachronistic joke. And whenever you centralize power and centralize cash flows amongst bureaucrats who have who they work all day long to steal, while normal Americans, like, once a year think, where do our tax dollars go? Why was UN what? And then they move on. And so all it has done is create an avenue for you just go look up the number of drunk driving UN bureaucrats UN delegates who have killed New Yorkers over the last 30 years without any penalty because they've got diplomatic immunity. That alone is a reason to get rid of these clowns. I mean, they do nothing useful. I haven't in years, and I think the whole world's finally waking up to it. And October 7th is the final reason we get to kill this beast once and for all. More condos. Get rid of it. Anyway, that's my thought. Not that I have an opinion, but it's really we're at a pivotal moment in history. I know you've got to run, so you know, I love that you took the time to come on. I love the perspective of someone who's approaching this very differently than, you know, a mining executive does. I'm not. I'm a marketing guy, and so, you know, what do you think is the biggest thing? If anyone is listening to this who, you know, spends more time sort of Wall Street tech, which is kind of my world, how do they very proactively get involved? How do they support what you're doing? How do they get involved?
Well, there are so many ways to get involved in a way that fits your lifestyle, whether you have an hour a week or whether you have 3 hours a day. So they range. One is if you are on social media, you lift up all the Jewish voices, obviously like mine. There's a lot of people like me who are out there doing this work every day and trying to curate the right news. It's very difficult to get accurate news. So one of the things I recommend to everyone is to listen to the Times of Israel daily briefing. It's 17 minutes long, and it will really give you an up-to-date, accurate version of what's happening in the world. Similarly, I recommend listening to some of Sam Harris's podcast and Dan Senor's podcast and Barry Weiss's podcast. And then I also think that it's really important to get involved. So talk about these issues at your dinner table so that you're making sure your kids are sort of, you know, guarded from being radicalized. Talk about this stuff with your friends. Speak up whenever you hear anything anti-Semitic. You have to be a voice, whether you're Jewish or not, especially if you're not Jewish. We need you just as much. And, you know, get involved with the school board meetings and write to your senator, do all of the things. There are so many avenues to get involved, whether you're an alum of a college that hasn't been on the right side of history, write them letters, make it uncomfortable for anyone who's
When
on.
they ask for a donation, send a nickel, lest they think you've
and
forgotten.
say why. And the thing is, say why. You know, I have a
Why?
friend who's boycotting our reunion, and I said that works if you were saying why. Otherwise, people just think you couldn't make it.
Right.
So you always want to use your voice in every way you can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Very enjoyable conversation. I'm glad we got a chance to have it. I would always welcome you back if you got time, but good luck at everything you're doing. And may we prevail.
May we prevail. I love it. Yisrael, hi.
Yeah, but I'm Mr. Chai indeed.